All aboard!
Hey, what's up, everybody? You're listening to Cannabis Karaoke, where we ask you to grab the mic and tell your story. Get inside info from today's most interesting cannabis pioneers, and from the first note to the end of the song, listen up as you get to hear the stories of success on Cannabis Karaoke. Welcome back to another episode of Cannabis Karaoke. I'm your host, Danny Keith, and during these times, we're going to be talking to thought leaders, event producers, brands, dispensaries, maybe some customers. We're going to be highlighting people's different path as we go through this COVID period, and I have a really good interview on deck today. We're going to be talking with Bethany Moore. She's the communications manager for NCIA. She is also a poet and a witch, and has been a marijuana activist or cannabis activist since the early 2000s. Thank you, Bethany, for taking some time today. And just for the record, we all make mistakes. I just flubbed the first intro and in like forever on this podcast, so I appreciate you letting me look a little bit unprofessional at the moment.
No worries. It's great to join you today, Danny.
You're also a podcaster as well, so I know how fun you got a kick out of my little shit moment and had to start over.
Totally been there 100 times, definitely. That's why we pre-record.
So just like anything else right now, we're in a digital world, and it's magnifying. I'll be honest. Ahead of this little break that we've had, I was social. I feel like most people would say I knew what I was doing with social, but it's kind of really starting to kick off now, and it's not just the Facebook, Instagram kind of piece. And you being someone that works with an events company, which you guys are, I would want to say, one of the cornerstone business events that I've always attended, and you've done a really great job of keeping the industry connected and really being a voice in the space. And with anything else, there's ups and downs. We were talking a little bit before we jumped on how your job is to tell the story. Your job is to integrate with brands and people, and you do your podcast. Tell us what's going on, how NCIA might be pivoting, and with respects to what you do for them, and how maybe in the near future we're going to see piggybacks on events with a digital component that we may have never thought of before.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right with what's happening with the coronavirus pandemic. Obviously, NCIA, our events are well known by people like yourself. Not only our major conferences and trade shows that we put on throughout the year, but also our regional networking events that are sometimes exclusive only to NCIA members. So those have been postponed for a while until we can all be back out in public. But NCIA is a trade association. So we're a 501c6 nonprofit trade association. So in addition to all these events where people network and get education and check out what's on the expo floor, we're also a full service trade association. So in addition to the community that we create, we also provide education and advocacy. So our lobbyists are still in DC full-time representing the industry. They're just not walking into the House and Senate buildings right now. And as far as the content that we provide and the education, we've always produced blogs. And we've had our podcast, our weekly podcast that I host for 3.5 years now. And we've done videos and other types of resources. Our policy council publishes policy papers. So all that stuff, that is still happening. In fact, it has quadrupled, if not more, in order to meet the need of everybody sitting at home staring at their screens.
Yeah, it's good to know that we've got lobbyists. I mean, like one of the comments that we've run across multiple times on these interviews is, we've been deemed an essential business, but the banks don't necessarily recognize us as an essential business. Is that I just read something the other day that I think it was Nancy Pelosi's trying to get the next COVID relief, a component in there for essential banking. Did you see that, or have you heard anything about that?
I've been following these financial assistance bills as they've been negotiated back and forth a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, our content has quadrupled, so I'm kind of drinking from the fire hose there. But yes, cannabis in the states where they are licensed, regulated cannabis companies, they are essential businesses, except in Massachusetts right now where it's medical only. And I truly hope the governor of Massachusetts reverses the closing of adult use cannabis dispensaries. But in most other states, including here in Colorado, where for only 3 hours, the prohibition hadn't even gone into effect, but for 3 hours, there was a threat of both liquor stores and adult use dispensaries not being deemed as essential. So they reversed that decision in 3 hours when they saw the long lines at both the dispensaries and the liquor stores as soon as people got the word. But on that bigger federal level, like I mentioned, it's only in states where there is a legal cannabis program. So cannabis is still federally illegal, which is why we're still facing this crisis with banking. On the federal level, and this is why NCIA's advocacy component is so important, Washington, D.C. at the federal level moves at a glacial pace. And getting safe banking, where there's a bill that NCIA has been working on for years called Safe Banking, the Secure and Fair Enforcement Banking Act, we finally got that out of committee in the House of Representatives and passed out of the House by a really great vote margin, I might add, and now it's in the Senate. So this is a standalone piece of cannabis banking legislation. It only addresses banking for state legal cannabis operators. So it's just sitting in the Senate right now, and the Senate, since the start of the year, has been a little bit distracted.
Just slightly. I remember, it was probably I used to sit on the board of a local credit union, and so we would go to credit union functions, like big credit union functions in different parts of the world. And one of them I went to was in Vegas, and I happened to meet a gentleman who was working on, I think it was called the Four Corners Bank. It was supposed to be a credit union. He applied for his charter. And unfortunately, like back in the day when we had trouble moving money around, like the reason Farmers Banks popped up was because they needed a place to bank that was not going to be mixed or intermingled with those, Wall Street types. Now we don't really have that chance. Like it would make sense that certain cannabis businesses would all get together. I mean, to form a credit union, there are vehicles for credit unions to form and serve certain functions of our community. But it seems like every time we try to run one up the flagpole for cannabis, it just gets shot out. And as much as I'd like to have hope for this bill to get through, I just feel like there's still, like, we have such a top end problem with older thinking, and not necessarily even conservatives, because there's a lot of states that have conservative that are, all for cannabis, because there's obviously tax revenue and, it's all about less government. But at the end of the day, I think it's still going to take them doing a deschedule, which with the, current landscape of presidents we have coming up is a little bit scary and a little bit dicey. I mean, you got Biden who thinks like descheduling to Schedule 2 would solve the problem, which would just completely collapse the entire cannabis market. And then Lord knows what Trump's thinking at the moment. So, here we are, face again another election where we thought 4 years ago, we had seen the worst, and yet the worst is to come. How does NCIA look at forward future, if you will, around what this next president may or may not do? Like, how do you guys prepare for that?
Sure. I think there's a couple layers to it. One, there's of course the president himself or herself, or in this case, we know it's two male candidates left.
Yep, unfortunately.
Here we are. We had so many great options earlier on, and here we are. Nevertheless, we have a presidential scorecard on our website, thecannabisindustry.org, under policy and advocacy menu header, I believe. Yep. And there were more candidates there, a few weeks back, and we tracked where they stood on various issues like states' rights, deschedulization, decriminalization, things like that. Now we're down to the two candidates, and here's what we know about them. And we are continuing to monitor anything they do or say between now and the election. And we will update that section of our website. Now, of course, in addition to electing a president, there's more to that ballot this November, right? There's members of Congress that are up for re-election. So we, as voters, can go down into a congressional scorecard level and look at what candidates have done in the past. Have they co-sponsored or even sponsored themselves any bills that support cannabis? Have they made any public statements in support of cannabis policy? This is what we look at as we approach Election Day. We made great progress a few years ago, and if not for the people we got into office, especially in the House, we gained a lot of great allies for cannabis policy reform in this last congressional election. So not all the power is held at the presidential level, and I think people need to remember that.
Yeah, it's pretty true. The website is flush with information on that kind of stuff. How does, the biggest challenge we seem to have is getting people out to vote. Like, it's amazing. Like, I'm sure I see you on Facebook, that's how I reached out to you. And like, we both sit back and watch everything from the conspiracy theories to the 5G theories to like Bill Gates is evil. I swear we're not ready for social media yet, but how do we tap into that passion of people to get them to actually vote? Because we all know that at the end of the day, very, very a minority margin is what drives the kind of the basis of this country. I mean, I think we had, like 40% of the country or something voted. I may be off a little bit, but it's just pathetic. Like, even here in Santa Cruz, we had 2 people being recalled because they were completely out of their minds. And we still got such a low, everybody wanted them recalled. They barely got recalled. And you're just wondering, like, is it that much work to get your ass out and actually vote? Like, how do we solve that problem? How do you guys talk to voters? How do you influence dispensary owners? How do you influence brands to kind of get out there and make sure that they vote? Because really, with our industry, that's the only way we're going to enact change, is if we get the right people into office that make the right decision.
I know. I almost want to say it's a rhetorical question, because we know that's the issue, right? We need to show up. I don't know. Maybe we can offer a free avocado toast when you show your sticker or something,
or make dispensaries polling, places where people can go vote as they get their weed. I mean, I just think that we have to make it. It's more of a question for the infrastructure of our country. Like, it seems maniacal to try to have 300 million, or let's just say 200 million people get to the polling booth on a Tuesday, and it's not a holiday. Like, and there's so many sideways things that when you go to vote, like, you really have to, I mean, my wife and I really sit down and read everything, because the fors and the againsts are not, I mean, we learned pretty quickly with Tiger King that nothing is everything that it seems to be. You got to dig a little deeper. And that's like, I feel like Tiger King is like our political infrastructure right now. Nothing is what it seems to be, and it's going to be curious to see how we come out of this pandemic. And, I think some people think the virus is just going to decide to go away. Like, how is that changing? I know we talked a little bit in the beginning about your day-to-day job is already digital and now it's quadrupling. How do you see what we're going through right now kind of impacting the future, and specifically to NCIA? Like, how are you guys going to be planning for events, and what kind of mechanisms, if in any, can you guys integrate into like getting people to vote and show up so that we can make some change?
I mean, yeah, those are all great questions. I mean, there's the idea of motivating. Sure, you may have motivated voters, but as you touched on, what if those voters don't have access to the polls? What if they have to go to work? What if they can't drive? I think seeing more online and by mail voting opportunities would obviously help a lot of people out, to be able to mail in a ballot if you don't have access to drive to a polling place just seems like easy.
Why can't we vote on our phones? Why can't we just have an app like you can if you can bank and pay bills with Apple Pay, and there's always going to be some level of hacking that takes place. Whether it's, I think if we were able to do something through an app per se, people could vote right when they wake up in the morning. You could hound them all day to vote, and then there's less chance. I feel like paper ballots and all that is so easily manipulated. And oops, we just lost 2 bins of ballots, and anytime you add a human into it, it just seems to kind of clog up the pipe a little bit.
I'd love to see the technology around voting and the ability for people to plug in to being advocates, to connecting with their members of Congress and their legislators. And it is interesting what we're going through. As you mentioned, we've been sheltered in place for a month. Some of us, me, just over a month. We're all working remotely. We have figured it out. We've taken the technology home with us that we need. We've figured out workarounds. A lot of people have mentioned that this coronavirus is really showing us which jobs really, really needed to be at a desk in an office versus where there's more flexibility for workers to split their time between home and the office, right? And with the increase of blogs and podcasts and online resources and videos for us to consume connection, for us to consume education and knowledge and information, I think even when measures are loosened around social distancing and businesses reopening, I think we're still going to see an increase in that kind of online content because things aren't just going to go back to normal. I really think it's going to be incremental, and I've been reading some things that support my thinking on that. They're not just going to open up the whole world and release the hounds, right? They're going to start by opening some businesses and then work their way up to restaurants and then bars. And the last thing that we're going to see open is theaters and stadiums and larger gatherings of people. So, I mean, that begs the question, what do you do as an organization that's running, state-of-the-art educational conferences? Well, we'll see. Hopefully we'll see you on San Francisco at the Moscone Center on September 29th and 30th and October 1st for our rescheduled Cannabis Business Summit and Expo. It's our 7th year. Virtual online opportunities to continue to engage people, to continue to educate people. We used to produce one webinar a month at NCIA. We just started doing that last year. We're increasing that like 4 or 5-fold just so we can make sure that we have a connection and that we're continuing to keep this industry connected with each other, inspired, informed. A lot of our content is around how to handle COVID-19 as a dispensary owner, right? Since we're essential businesses. We started a hashtag campaign called Cannabis is Essential, just to underscore that thought that, cannabis is an essential business. Let's protect it. Let's pass banking. Let's legalize it nationwide.
God, so many nuggets that you just popped out right there of value. I hope people take those in and listen. It gave me chills. I've been obviously smoking weed my whole life. It's always been part of my life in some fashion. I've always moved some weight, and I was kind of the duffel bag kid back in the day. And, when it's like this, the whole COVID thing has kind of put a stress test across everything, right? It's like one humongous stress test. And it's funny when they had to make that decision, are they or are they not? Because I feel like, at least in California where I'm at, there's been this line where it's like, we're doing it because that's what people want. You know what I mean? Versus like the real need. Colorado is a little bit more holistic, I feel, in the whole cannabis space. I may be wrong. I don't live there. That's for you to tell me. But in California, initially they also said, nope, sorry. And then it wasn't until there was an outcry that they reversed that. And actually we have a couple counties. The biggest struggle we have in California is that the state legalized, but then it's up to the counties and the cities to implement. And it's just a cluster when it's like that. And so you have these different counties that are like, sorry, it's only going to be medicinal now. You know, you can't just do recreational. And that's happening in San Jose and Santa Cruz at the moment. And, you know, all of a sudden the pot docs are back in business because they had gone out of business because nobody was getting their medical card anymore. Even though they could save some money, they can buy more cannabis. They're just like, I'll just go in and get my cannabis. I see that as being a resurging component. I don't really care. I just am glad that when we got that designation as essential, that was such a breakthrough moment for us as an industry, because up until then, I don't think anybody had really put that thought to that. And then when you start talking about, you know, the broader spectrum, like let's just take the world as a whole, how amazing our planet is coming back right now, because we're not out just doing what we think we need to do every day. As humans, we're not very smart about what we need to do or what we have to do. We do what we want to do. And I think management should be taking a note on all of this and saying, man, we could actually reduce our offices. Like so many people, the 2 times I've had to run a regular job, like I'm probably, you and I are probably a lot alike in the sense that if it takes me 16 hours to do something, it takes me 16 hours to do something. If it takes me 3, woohoo, I can start day drinking, you know? And so this whole process of like butt and seat for 9 hours, 2.5 hours away each direction might be going away. We might see people realizing that, I mean, first of all, some of these businesses they're going to have had to give up their offices. They're going to have had to give up their locations, but they're still going to want to keep their business, and they're still going to want to keep their champions unless those people leave or get laid off, at which point now there's so much talent available. I mean, even before we went into COVID, there were so many talented cannabis people that were going through the first phase of layoffs because they were the highest up in the space. And all of a sudden the typical process of like removing a high paid person to get 2 lower paid people to do the same job was starting to happen. Coming on the back of this, I feel like there's going to be like this plethora of people that are not necessarily associated or have an alliance to any one business in general. Does NCIA see themselves getting involved in like helping reconnect employees to employers in the space? Like, is that something that you guys are talking about internally?
Man, that's a great question. I think there's so much ahead of us that worrying about those that are losing their jobs in the industry is definitely a concern as an industry that's shown to be such a great job creator, actually. In states that are legalizing, it's creating massive amounts of jobs, not just at the dispensary, but the cultivation sites, the manufacturing facilities, everything. And then all the ancillary businesses that support, the lawyers, the accountants, the marketing professionals, the software companies. I would like to think this is all temporary. I would like to think this recession in general, not only for the cannabis industry, but for all of us, is short term, that we're not going to see this stretch out over 2-3 years like we saw 10 years ago in the Great Recession, which kicked me on my rear end. I don't know.
It was a reset for me. I mean, I went
totally.
I was in action sports prior, and so I had owned my surf shop in Santa Cruz I still own it, but it's operated by somebody else at the moment. But 24 years I was in business, and then like October 2008, I remember distinctly when I started seeing numbers just drop out of nowhere, and you're going, what the hell? Mm-hmm. I lost a house. My wife and I split up for a little bit. Like, it was hectic, and you had to rebuild, and a lot of people face tough times when that takes place. And so when this one went down, I posted up on Facebook and I just told people, I said, hey, if you're struggling, give me a call, we'll talk about it. And, it's funny, it's not funny, it's anecdotal, I guess, that people have pretty much the same concerns. How am I going to pay my bills? Am I going to have a job when I come out of this? There's like some basic, securities that people are worried about. And, for once, the recession, it flipped a lot of people's carts, but not everybody's, right? In this situation, it's literally flipped everyone's cart. Like, I read a thing the other day that we've lost 500,000 millionaires since the stock market has tanked, And so that's real, man. That's tangible.
Wow.
Yeah. So I
wild.
think, I think when you start talking about people having jobs, and you're right, it is a job creation market, and like I could look at dispensaries right now, they're blowing up, and so are brands, but they're doing it with almost no staff because it's all curbside pickup or delivery. So I can see some people, out of these endeavors, if you look back over time, every time we've had something to this scale of catastrophe, if you will, there's been a lot of amazing things that have come out on the back end of it. And that's what I'm trying to employ with people is like, look, yeah, somebody came and flipped our table. We got to now pick up the pieces and try to figure it out. But remember that job that you were working that you didn't like? Well, maybe this is the time to change that. There's so much cover that COVID provides, or this kind of a situation provides, that allows people to pivot and go do something else. Speaking of pivot, I want to talk, we talked a little bit about the NCIA game, which is your day-to-day. Let's talk about your poetry. Bring up a little bit about like how you're inspired to write and what you've done with it so far.
Oh yeah, thanks for asking. I have been writing poetry since elementary school. I had a fifth grade teacher actually also that really encouraged me too. And I've just been involved in poetry groups and clubs and open mic nights for years in the DC area, a little bit in Portland, Oregon, here in Denver, Colorado. Wow, really, really amazing poets here as well. So I've self-published 4 books so far. 3 of them are poetry collections. One of them is actually a short story. It's a dark fairy tale, is the best way I can describe it. All of them have themes, whether it's the poetry or the story, themes of nature, things of natural disasters, weather, space, as well as spirituality, like ritual and alchemy, and very pagan elements to them. So I have combined 2 things that are very meaningful to me and my identity, which is poetry as well as my spirituality. And in pretty much every piece, there's an infusion of, not only whatever I'm trying to express emotionally or thoughtfully, the symbolism I use and the themes I use are typically surrounding nature and ritual and a little bit of space. I like planets and stars and nebulas and those kinds of concepts too. So they're all on Amazon. I used, the Amazon self-publishing platform for Kindle. So it's available in both print and digital Kindle format on Amazon.
And what has people's response been to that? Because that's a passion play for you, correct? I mean, you're writing from a point of passion. It's not something that, obviously if it took off and went really huge, you'd be stoked on it, but you came at it from a place of passion. I always love, when you say you do open mic night, I always think of Henry Rollins when he first started doing his open mic nights, and spoken word. And I'm a big fan of vaudeville style entertainment. I don't mean to discredit anybody's, practice, but it's like, that in immediate, it's kind of why I named Cannabis Karaoke, why I named it is because like, it's just this open mic of us talking about stuff and, you never know how it's going to really go. And so when you're doing the open mic with poetry, it's pretty much an intimate setting, right? You're in a coffee shop, you're in a bar, maybe you're in, or at least a restaurant that's got an area that you can actually sequester off. How did you deal with that? Because getting up in front of a mic to read something that you've written yourself takes a little bit of guts to stand up and do that.
Sure. I think every poet is different. Some enjoy the writing and are maybe a little too shy to perform it in public. But they're okay just sharing it online with somebody for they themselves to read. for me, I mean, I also enjoyed singing and performing in theater. So there's an element of wanting to get up on stage and share my art and share my experience with an audience and move them and make them think about their lives, make them think about my life, make them think about someone else's life, just inspire them maybe. So it's a relationship with your audience if you're one of those people that really enjoys getting up and doing public speaking or singing or reading poetry. It's almost like I'm compelled to do it. I can't not do it. I have to. I get release from it. It's catharsis. And whether the audience connects with it or not is honestly a whole separate issue. It's the feeling I get also of getting up there on stage, sharing 2 or 3 poems, my face being flush and I'm all shy, kind of. And then I get off stage and they clap and then I sit down and I'm just happy that I did it. I feel good that I got it out of my system, no matter what. And then ideally somebody is like, hey, I really liked your poem. And I say, awesome. I'm really glad you connected with it. And then I feel like my art's going even that much further.
Yeah. It's being someone like I totally relate because after doing almost a decade of on-air live radio and then not doing it anymore. And then I like to storytell. So like we'll film like for Emerald Cup or other events and, you know, kind of help tell that story. But there is something cathartic about doing your own thing. And I'm somewhat of a performer, not to your level. I'm envious that you can sit down and do poetry. I've always wanted to write, but I can't. I want to be able to just get somebody that can ghostwrite for me so that I can just talk to them because I get distracted pretty easily. And so I end up starting something and then not finishing it. Or I don't know about you, but that my notepad on my phone is a huge friend or foe if somebody were to find it. But, you know, I sometimes will throw out my thoughts, you know, verbally on, you know, a notepad just so I can go back to them later. What's your practice on how you kind of tune in your work and what you're going to present to people? Because some things sound great after, you know, some drinks or some cocktails, and then you read it back in the morning, I think that one's going to stay where it's at right now.
Oh, I definitely recommend having a little bit to drink or smoke. Definitely helps. I think, well, the writing process, I can actually kind of relate that in the last couple of years, I haven't written as much as I would like to. I was just like, I was on fire a few years ago, though. 3, 4, 5 poems a night. My favorite thing to do is go sit at a coffee shop or a bar even, or a restaurant by myself and open up. I do this with my journal or diary, whatever you'd like to call it as well. I'll just sit there over some coffee or a couple drinks, maybe some dinner, and write in my journal. And typically there has been some kind of concept or thought or a set of words that struck me during the day that I want to like sit down and work with. Those strikes from the muse, those flashes of inspiration while you're like sitting at a red light or something on the way to Target, and you're like, oh, I have to remember that for later when I can sit down and expound upon it. So that's probably the best way to describe like how I really get the good poems that come out, or is I get that lightning flash of some kind of idea, and then I finally sit down and start scribbling it out.
So when I have a question real quick because I'll forget. So do you write in order? Because sometimes when I write, like when I do things, it doesn't always come out in order. Like sometimes I'm writing the middle and then I go back and do the beginning. Or sometimes I'm writing the end. How is that similar in a process for you, or do you literally go start to finish with your stuff?
No, it's interesting. I think when I, do the first draft and get the first run of ideas out, I'll end up looking at it more holistically and saying, maybe I should switch these paragraphs or stanzas, flip those, or, oh, I don't like that word, I'm going to cross that out and put this other word there. And sometimes I've got like arrows around.
Right? Circles, arrows, and stars.
Circles, arrows, stars. Yeah. So they get a little flow chart looking at some point, and then I do a fresh, clean copy and look at it again and see how I like it. And I like to do handwritten because of those circles and arrows and crossing things out. It's a very tactile experience. It's more immersive, and then I kind of save the final version for when I type it up and put it in a digital format. It should be pretty much 100% locked in by the time I type it up.
Well, and it's something that kind of commits to memory too. Like I find, when we do anything, and it's not like it's some ingenious method or anything, but I have millions of little notepads, moleskin notebooks, or whatever you want to call them. And by the way, for giveaways at shows, I love people that give away branded moleskin notepads, because I literally blow through those things so fast. But I take notes with me everywhere I go, no matter what. Even if I don't have an actual physical notepad, I'll take notes on the phone. Not because I won't remember, because I do have a pretty photographic memory, but it's more to like impress upon me it's weird. My body kind of interprets the notes later as like what's important and what's not important. But if I don't write it down, it's like I don't kick off the component of being constructive with whatever I'm trying to accomplish. And to your point, it is something that's a bit of a list making process to make sure that you go through and you finish everything A to B. Writing can be really fun and invigorating, or it can be just a pain in the ass. And so for me, I try to make it as fun and as invigorating as possible.
I look forward to getting some more inspiration here soon and writing some fresh material.
You got to get out. I think from what I'm hearing, like I'm another one that likes to go to coffee shops as well. And I feel like the frenetic energy that's around me somehow fills me to where I'm in my own zone, but all these people are doing their thing around me. And so it's like, I just, for whatever reason, I feel like I pick up that energy and it really kind of ignites my creativity, which brings us to our topic of being a pagan. So you're a self-proclaimed witch, which I think that's great. I think we're more in touch with the earth than I feel like religion is. And so talk to me a little bit about being a pagan in these days and what it is and how it is you practice that. Because it's not just people think, oh, he's a witch. Oh, she's casting spells. That's not really what it's all about. I mean, it's a component of it, but it's really about tuning in to nature and tuning into Mother Earth. And, most of our religious holidays actually are built off pagan practices.
Very true. Yes. It's a topic I enjoy speaking on. Much like poetry, I found paganism or witchcraft or Wicca, whatever you'd like to refer to it at a young age. And my parents were supportive, even as, Midwestern moderate conservatives. Thankfully, they were very supportive when I came out of the broom closet and told them I study witchcraft and paganism. My dad was pretty cool about it. He's like, I know what that is. So he wasn't scared. And I also found a group, and this was the mid 90s in Southern Maryland, in St. Mary's County, Maryland. So I found a group of elders from the first Wiccan metaphysical shop to ever open up in Southern Maryland, I'm sure, called Keepers of the Moon Garden. I went there as soon as it opened, met the shop lady. My parents gave everyone permission for me as a minor to study with that coven, which turned out to be statewide with hives and state recognized as an organization as well. So I studied under those elders to learn about the wheel of the year, the different holidays, to learn about herbal medicine. Of course, there's all those things like crystals and astrology and ritual. There's lots to study in paganism. There's lots of different topics, no matter when it interests you. And even beyond, when I went off to high school college in the early 2000s, I found another women's circle up closer to University of Maryland. Enjoyed practicing with them as well. And even when I can't find a group to share community with, I've been comfortable over the years just inviting friends who are Wicca friendly, not necessarily serious about it, but they think it's cool. And they'll join me for a ritual, a very kind of pared down urban ritual, as I like to call it, where we're just sharing space. We're honoring the natural cycles around us of the wheel of the year, whatever season it is, the moon phase, things going on in our lives. And it's an opportunity to share space and energy with each other and talk about things we want to bring into our lives and manifest into our lives and grow and nurture, as well as the other side of, destruction and banishing and cleansing and freeing things that aren't serving us anymore, that we don't need any longer, or we don't want. And then just the strength to deal with the things we can't control as well, providing that community with each other and providing an opportunity for us to look within ourselves for things we need in order to thrive.
Yeah, it's fun. It's interesting that you say that, because I've not really a religious person, but I've kind of made it a point to go and experience as many different religions as I can. And I feel like with the paganism play, like my wife is a little bit more pagan than anything else, and it's
cool.
It's really and I would consider myself either a pagan person or a Buddhist, because I feel like for me religion just seems so like confining, and it's almost like a baseball team or a football team. It's like exactly what's going on in politics right now, where it's like, are you red or are you blue? And it's like, well, sometimes I'm red and sometimes I'm blue, and maybe I'm blue more lately than I'm red, but it's really hard to make choices, right? Or to support, like all these churches going out and deciding to hold services right now and thinking that God's going to protect them. It's like, well, he doesn't protect you if he truly is there, or she, or whatever it is. The common sense piece has to be in play first. You can't say, I'm going to play chicken with a knife in my hand, and because I'm religious, I won't cut a finger off, is not exactly what the whole thing's been built on. And so for me, I see people like yourself, and I feel like you're a better tuning fork to who is and who isn't somebody you want to work with. Your eyes are more wide open to chain link reactions of having relationships or engaging with things. I kind of like to say, if I'm not feeling it in my gut necessarily, I really can't do it, no matter how much you're paying me or want me to do it. And I feel like what that kind of belief system really envelops is that free thinking and, being willing to make decisions. And then, like, to your point, like, a lot of people don't cast bad people out of your lives. I always tell people, judge my enemies by the people that judge me by my enemies, because those are people that I don't want to deal with. And those are people that I feel like I need to get out of my life. And I tell people all the time, we can agree to disagree, whatever. But like, if I stop wanting to interact with you, it's not just on social media, it's also in person, And so it's refreshing to hear your kind of take on all that stuff and how you actually apply it. So, as we kind of wrap up here, I want to give you a chance to tell people where they can find you on social media, what websites, and I'll include these in the blog. So if you don't want to spell them out, you don't have to. And then just we'll wrap up with talking about our 8:00 howling session that will take place tonight.
Yes. God, that Howl at 8 movement is saving my life right now.
It's been crazy out here in Santa Cruz, because on a darker note, we lost a very young girl to somebody that, was living within her area, and she always liked to howl. And so we've been howling in Santa Cruz now for close to 2 years, but it's definitely amplifying as we kind of are going through this period to the point where the entire coast is just all you hear is people howling. It's pretty impactful.
Wow. Yeah, it gives me shivers for sure.
Good stuff. So tell people where they can find you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, on Twitter and my Facebook.com URL, I go by, and on Instagram for that matter, I'm Beatnik Betty, Beatnik Betty. I also have a poetry page on Facebook. It's facebook.com/Bethany Moore poet. But Beatnik Betty is my social media handle and has been for many, many years. So that's probably a good way to find me.
Nice. And then we can find you hopefully from September 29th to October 1st in San Francisco, correct? To hold the next NCIA event?
You better believe it. Yeah, cannabisbusinesssummit.com. I believe we will have a on expo floor podcast studio. So
I saw you did that in Boston, was it, this last time?
Yes, that was great. It was our first time having a podcast studio right there on the expo floor.
So
and
awesome.
I got 22 interviews in 2 days. I was just killing it. It was great. So all that content is being released as we speak. In weekly episodes on NCIA's weekly podcast, NCIA's Cannabis Industry Voice.
It's crazy. This space doesn't have a lot of outlets to tell stories. And I feel like podcasts have been around for 20 years. But when cannabis came around, all of a sudden it just lit up the podcast world because everybody I know either wants to do one or has been on one. And so that's such a great feature to add to the show. I think it just gives people a chance to, it just builds so much, even after this, you and I are going to have a different relationship than we had before, which is actually just digital. I just started following you on Facebook and we became friends and we've met a couple times at NCIA, and it's but now I have a much clearer, bigger picture of what Beatnik Betty is all about and, how to, because it's important, right? We don't slow down enough at times to really get to know one another. And I feel like doing podcasts gives you that 40 minutes or so time to kind of figure out if you like the person or not. And if you do, you find out a little bit more about them that you didn't know before.
That's totally true. Yeah, I really enjoy getting to have conversations with people through the podcast, really, asking questions you probably wouldn't normally ask in passing, right?
Sure. Absolutely. Well, so
do you howl at 8?
Dude, I know, right? I'm a howler, so I will be howling with you at 8 o'clock tonight digitally. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time during this period where everything's a little bit in flux to get on and tell your story. And I hope we get to chat soon again. And even sooner, I hope we're out and about.
Yeah, 100%. And thank you for having me on the show and letting me share a little bit about more of myself with your audience. Appreciate it.
That's a wrap. Thank you for listening to this edition of Cannabis Karaoke, another kick-ass podcast about all things cannabis. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and our website, cannabiskaraoke.tv. And if you or someone you know would like to be on the show, please hit the book your interview button on the right. Cannabis Karaoke. Grab the mic and tell your story.
Wow!